So this morning, Sin Kelly is going to talk about Jung and Gebser and the fullness of time. I let you start and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm a little off right now because, as some of you know, my wife is in Japan, and Japan is in the middle of probably the largest typhoon possibly in its history, and an earthquake 5.7 also just struck outside of Tokyo. But apparently she's safe, according to an email. She's stranded with 7 other people somewhere, but I'll find out more later today. So my prayers go not only to her, but to all the people of Japan, and actually so many places in the world right now who are, as Hegel said, submerged and swimming in the labor of its or her own transformation. So these are 3 epigraphs that capture something of what I want to share with you today. The first one from Joachim of Fiore from almost 1,000 years ago, great Christian mystic who was convinced that in his age was the beginning, the dawn of the 3rd age, the age of the Spirit. The age of the Father had lasted from creation until the birth of Christ, and then with the coming of the Christ, the age of the Son had begun, and then he believed that in his time, about 1,000 years ago, the age of the Spirit had finally dawned. And since then, and even before, but especially since then, there have been periodic upsurges of consciousness and belief on the part of people, particularly in the Western world, that some kind of new age was at hand. And so we get to Hegel writing here around 1807, not long after the French Revolution, who also was convinced that it's not difficult to see that ours is a birth time, right, in a period of transition to a new era. I'll let you read that. Now, as you know, both Gebser and Jung also prophesied or announced that we were on the threshold of a new age. And we heard from Jeremy in our first talk tonight, and others, that many are calling this new age the Anthropocene, the age of the human, whatever that means. It means many things. It means something to geologists. It means something else altogether to many philosophers and cultural historians. But there is no doubt that we are on the threshold, crossing the threshold of a new age that many are calling the Anthropocene. And one of the things that it means is that the human, you can't really see this in this light unfortunately, but the human has now become its own geological sphere, along with the hydrosphere, the water that surrounds most of the planet, the atmosphere that encompasses it, the gossamer thin sphere of life, the biosphere, which penetrates all of the other spheres to a certain extent. Now there's a new sphere, the human, which was once a mere particle among the biosphere, has spread itself around the planet, permeating the planet, not only physically and electromagnetically and biochemically, radiologically, but in terms of consciousness, to constitute its own sphere encompassing the planet, and as you know, is in fact has changed the other geological spheres, most notably the atmosphere, but the other spheres as well, the oceans, the hydrosphere, even the tectonic plates are showing the influence of the human on the planet. Okay. It's another image showing communications and transport routes on the planet. Excuse me, this line here is just an indication, actually, of nitrogen flux from industrial agriculture, showing how the line from the early 20th century is now going like this. And of course, that the nitrogen flux is one of the factors contributing to the imminent collapse of life in the oceans. All right, I'll come back to, that's funny, I seem to be, this is, it's missing some, you're going to have to bear with me here. This is not doing what it's supposed to do. How can I get now to the... It's missing some slides. All right. I'm going to, if I can do... Now I can do a right click on my computer, and I don't know how to do it on here. Do you know what the equivalent of a right click is? I want to sort by name.
You have to, probably you have to.
It's missing a couple of. Right click, sort by name.
Yeah, but there's no right. It doesn't. Let's see. Sort by. There we go.
And let's see if that worked. If we go to the beginning again, yeah. Still not doing
It might have not. That's might.
It's
Can you see it there?
well, no, especially without my glasses.
If you make it full screen.
Yeah, a second. All right, it's good enough. This will be fine. No, actually, this is good.
Try pressing down with 2 fingers on the trackpad. That usually will give you the
I think we're good. I think we're good. Pardon the interruption. Okay. All right. Now, Jung, when he spoke of the New Age, the dawning of the New Age, he appealed to 2 traditions. One, the Christian tradition in which he and Western European culture was embedded, and in many ways is still embedded. And he referred to our age, which was coming to an end, as the Christian Aion. And Aion is a Greek word that refers actually to the astrological ages and the so-called Platonic year, which is defined by the zodiac, and actually the passage of the very slow passage of the spring point through the visible stars. It takes about 25,000 years for the spring point to make a whole revolution throughout the zodiac, which means that each zodiac sign is like a month, a Platonic month that lasts roughly 2,000 years. Okay? So at the time of the birth of Christ, the spring point had passed out of the age of, let me see, will this work? Can I expand? Oh, good. Had passed out of the age of Aries and moved into Pisces about 2,000 years ago. So the beginning of the Christian Aion coincided with the spring point, the sun rising on the first day of spring, with the constellation Pisces as a background. Okay? So that's the age of Pisces. And synchronistically, Christ was associated with the fish. He was a fisherman of men. The apostles were fish. And wonderfully, not an anagram, it's an anagram. The key symbol for Christ in Greek in the Hellenistic period, ictus, fish. If you take the first letters in Greek of ictus, it spells Jesu Christos, Theos, Huios, Soter. Right? Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Okay? So that was 2,000 years ago. And Jung points out that as the spring point precessed through the sign of Pisces, for the first 1,000 years, it was coinciding with this fish, which is pointed toward heaven, the vertical axis. And you can see that culminating in the Middle Ages with the building of the great cathedrals, with the stone itself pointing to heaven, with the cities growing centered around the cathedrals on the top of the hill, with the church providing the central symbol of meaning for the sacred canopy of the cultural worldview of Western Europe for that first 1,000 years. And it's toward the end of that Joachim of Fiore has his great revelation and initiates this tradition of thinking about the dawning of the age of the Spirit. Okay? But then the spring point, as it's moving through Pisces, passes the ligature between the two fish and is now engaged with the second fish on the horizontal axis. And it's at this point that the center of gravity and attention of the Western worldview starts to turn from heaven to earth, which brings us, of course, the Copernican revolution, the birth of modern science, the enormous growth in population, the technological revolution, and the literal transformation of the planet on all of its levels. Until we come to the end. This is just the constellation again, you can see it. The two fishes. Until we come to the end of the Piscean Aion, and we are now on the threshold of the Aquarian Aion. Okay? So this was Jung's basic psychophilosophy of history, rooted in the astrological ages. And we can think of that period that began about 2,000 years ago as also beginning with the very last phase of what scholars call the axial period, or the axial age, which actually began about 600 years before Christ and saw the simultaneous emergence of all of the world religions and world philosophies. So within 100 years, the Buddha, Mahavira, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Socrates, Isaiah, they're all born, and they all give birth to the world's great philosophical and world traditions. Okay? This coincides synchronistically as well with the only conjunction of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in the sky ever in the whole historical period, right at that point. So that's the first axial age. Okay? Now, one of these traditions, I'm going to show you here. This is from my book, Coming Home, by the way, if you want more details. So this looks at the first axial period, and there are various strands. There's the Hebrew, the Greek, the Persian, the Hindu, the Chinese. Okay? Now, before the axial period, of course, there had been many indigenous traditions for many, many thousands of years, but they start to get eclipsed, particularly during the axial period. And it happens to be one sort of hybrid strand of these axial traditions, particularly the Judeo-Christian and the Greek, that come together like two DNA strands, which will become the chrysalis for the rise of not only the West, but of the whole modern period, out of which will come modern science, technology, the great ideologies, which will transform the planet and give birth to the Anthropocene. Okay? Now, this refers back to that prescient line from Yeats. 20 years of stony sleep, vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. Right? From his poem, The Second Coming. I'm sure most of you know it, but if you don't, it's worth meditating on. Okay? Right. So this is a general schema for how I understand, I think how Jung and Gebser understand the evolution of consciousness. It's basically a three-act play, or a grand three-phase epic, beginning with origin, the mystery of origin, lured to some kind of goal, with a development in between. Now, we don't really know the absolute origin. Well, we know quite a bit of it from a cosmological point of view in terms of the Big Bang and so on, but in terms of the great mystery, it remains a mystery. We do know a lot about the origins of the historical period, about 5,000 years ago, because we have records that tell us about that. We also know a lot from starting around 600 BCE and the beginning of the Christian Aion, or the beginning of the Piscean age, about 2,000 years ago. And it's out of that new origin that we get the rise of modernity and an accelerating movement towards some kind of denouement, some kind of goal, or being lured to some kind of goal, which Gebser called the integral age, and Sri Aurobindo called the integral age. Teilhard de Chardin described it simply as omega, some kind of goal that he identified with the cosmic Christ. Now, what this spiral here indicates is the idea that we heard actually from Stephen Rosen yesterday. Was that yesterday? Yeah. That Yeah. The apeiron, the boundless. Right? We can imagine things rising from the boundless. I would call it not only the boundless, but there are moments of transparency to origin, which are surges of creative activity, creative impulses that start to manifest. And they give rise to new forms, which then get solidified, calcified, and rooted in the social and often political times and become deficient and degenerate. But then with a collapse, a new contact with origin emerges, gives rise to a new form, calcifies, and so on. So you have this spiraling motion. And Stephen pointed to the 60s as one recent period where we had an upsurge of the contact and awareness of the apeiron, I would say transparency to origin, which we see in the countercultural movement. With I show these lines here that indicate some of the features of transparency with each of these new phases, namely the dominant axial strand, which gave rise to modernity, starts to become more conscious of and drawing from the other ones, in this case Eastern traditions and eventually indigenous traditions, start to feed into these new upsurges of cultural creativity. Okay? This is one summary I've put here of the evolution of consciousness. Only the Gebser's three structures, magical, mythic, mental, that are always present. Here we have the standard historical divisions of the three acts from the ancient to the modern to the postmodern. Here I distinguish between two varieties of postmodernism, the one that is purely deconstructive, again, that Stephen spoke eloquently about, but there are other versions of the postmodern that some people call a constructive postmodernism, of which Jung and Gebser certainly would stand as great representatives, where something, it's no longer modern, but it's trying to integrate the modern and birth something new. The three Gebserian phases of pre-perspectival, perspectival, aperspectival. And what we see here is that going from the first axial age to the second axial age, now some people are describing the new age that is dawning as a second axial age, which draws from all of the axial traditions as well as the indigenous earth-based traditions to articulate a new consciousness that is grounded in our interbeing and shared origin and destiny as living members of this living earth. Okay? If we have time, I can tell you more about people talking about the second axial age. Yeah, that is a lovely symbol, isn't it? Now, the paradox of our time, of the second axial age, of the threshold upon which we stand, where so many people among us are having intimations of a dawning of a new age and a transparency to origin, a new transparency to origin, which offers the possibility of recovering so much of what has been lost, is that the living body of Earth, not upon which we live, but within which we are, is in a process of accelerating crisis. This is a summary set of graphs from the Great Transition Institute describing the so-called Great Acceleration of our times. And it just gives socioeconomic and Earth system trends. We're familiar, of course, with world population. These are all basically hockey stick graphs. Okay? So world population, obviously, urban population, large dams, transportation, telecommunications, international tourism, and so on. But then in terms of the physiology of Earth, the Earth system trends, carbon dioxide methane, right? Coastal nitrogen, we saw that before, which is leading to the death of the oceans, so on. So all of these graphs, I just want to single out a few here. This one shows species loss over the last 160,000 years. But actually, so species are always being lost. There's a so-called background rate of species loss, which over geological time has been very constant, not only for 160,000 years, but for the last 65 million years. Okay? You would have to extend that line really, really far until now. Okay? So the last time the planet was in the grips of a mass extinction was 65 million years ago, when an asteroid hit the Yucatan Peninsula and wiped out about 2/3 of life on the planet. Of course, there were no humans then. There were very few mammals, only small shrew-like mammals. And it took millions of years for the Earth to recover. Thankfully, it did, and actually gave rise, starting around a few 100,000 years ago, to the greatest period of biodiversity the planet has ever seen, with the Cambrian explosion, and then eventually the rise of our own species 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. But we are on this threshold of mass extinction, and it's happening a lot faster than the 165 million years ago. Largely, but not exclusively, because of CO2 emissions. This is an older chart, but it shows you over the last 800,000 years, right? So our species emerged about here. Okay? There were hominins, of course, going back to about here, but our species only emerges here. But what you see is that in this period, CO2 has wavered in a natural sort of biorhythm. It's almost like a heart rate or a breathing rhythm until our own time. The last time we've had this much carbon in the atmosphere, right now we're just past 400 parts per million. The last time there was this much carbon in the atmosphere, the oceans were 30 meters higher. Yeah? Anyway. This is temperature difference over the last 2,000 years. So in the Christian Aion, or the Piscean Aion, Arctic summer temperature. Of course, the Arctic is critical because it's the air conditioner of the planet. At least it has been while there was ice, but once the ice is gone, there's no more air conditioning. All of these graphs, these hockey stick graphs, point to the idea of a threshold. And the threshold indicates archetypally, from a Jungian point of view, that we are on a threshold of initiation. And all initiations in traditional cultures involve either a literal or a symbolic confrontation with death, a near-death experience, in other words, if they're real initiations. The unique character of our moment is that the planet as a whole, centered on human consciousness but involving the whole web of life, is involved in a near-death experience. Yeah? Now, this here is just showing the deeper logic, the Hegelian logic, but it's also the Jungian logic of initial participation or identity, the differentiation of opposites that Eva spoke about yesterday. And the possibility of a new identity, at least. Of course, there's no certainty at this point. The threshold upon which we stand is like the event horizon of a black hole. And again, Stephen spoke of black holes. There's so many resonances with all of the talk so far about what I wanted to say. And if you've been following the science news, it's just, we're discovering that the universe is just chock full of black holes. Our own galaxy has a supermassive black hole out at the center. There are others in our own galaxy. They're very mysterious objects because the laws of the mental structure and of physics as we know it seem to collapse into some kind of mysterious singularity once you pass the so-called event horizon. Now, this is an artist's rendition of what an event horizon might look like, because nobody had seen a black hole until about a month or two ago. It's not like a single photo, but it's the technology involved in being able to produce this image of a black hole that is unbelievably far away. I mean, I don't know how many billions of light years away. It's so far away. But it's the first image ever of the event horizon of a black hole. I'm going to go here first. This is my former student, now Dr. Todd Desmond, who did his dissertation with me, brilliant dissertation, showing compellingly and in great detail the hand-to-glove fit between Jung's archetypal psychology and Leonard Suskind's physics of string theory of black holes. Okay? And he bases it, at least the root of the dialogue and the integration of these two perspectives, comes from a statement of Jung's in one of his letters where he's trying to get at the essence of psyche, or we might say the field of consciousness. What is it? You know? And what Jung says at one point is that psyche is the highest intensity in the smallest space. That's basically a definition of a black hole. 5 minutes, oh my God. Okay, well, you have to look up why. Okay, so just as we are discovering that the universe, in a sense, is structured by black holes, just as Jung saw that the psyche is structured by archetypes and complexes, which in his late essay he describes as the starry field of multiple intelligences. Our knowledge of the cosmos and the psyche are converging just at this moment where we are poised on the threshold of initiation, facing death. Okay? I don't have time to get into this. Exoplanets, right? We're discovering thousands of planets. Every other star that you see in the night sky, which is only a fragment, tiny fragment of the number of stars in the galaxy, every other star is a sun with planets orbiting it. Chances are that the cosmos is chock full of life, intelligent life. Unfortunately, we'll never get there because the closest star even to us, of the billions upon billions of stars, would take thousands and thousands of years to get there with the even next century's technology. I mean, unless, of course, we discover warp drive, which you never know. Okay. I don't have time to get into this. We won't get to another planet, certainly not in time. There's only this planet. There's no Earth 2.0. There's only Earth, right? Whatever Elon Musk and his followers care to say. So just as the Earth is being gripped in this paroxysm of a kind of death spiral, falling into a death spiral, there's a mass movement, and it's growing, and it's even as we speak. Came out of the UK, but it's going global. Extinction Rebellion, rebelling for life. Demonstrations going on. This is a recent die-in Vienna. Chris Hedges just published this essay just yesterday. If you look up Chris Hedges on Extinction Rebellion, so the longer we live in denial, the worse it will get. There is no way out. Floods, droughts, monster hurricanes, cyclones, extreme heat waves, crop failure, mass displacement, and the breakdown of society are now inevitable. Many of my colleagues believe that's true. This is our future. The democratic methods for change, voting, lobbying, petitions, education, and protests have proved to be spectacular failures, except for Extinction Rebellion is actually getting some traction. You can read the rest. I won't read it for you. Okay? So he's pointing to both the gravity of our situation, but also the great inspiration of Extinction Rebellion. This is its logo. The Earth, the circle, and the hourglass. The circle is the Earth. The hourglass is time is up. But it's also in Gebserian terms that Chronos, that kind of relationship to time, is up, is dying. 1 minute. Okay?
Sorry to be the Chronos.
That's all right. Oh, there's Blessed Jung. Okay, I don't.
Oh, right.
There was one little. Well, I guess it's not here. Okay, and my time is up.
Yes.
So we can have some discussion. Thank you.
Questions?
Questions? Sighs, groans?
You mentioned,
sorry.
you mentioned the constellation conjunction for the first axial age. Is when you're talking about the second axial age, is there a constellation?
No,
conjunction too?
no. The next triple conjunction of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto is not for another 1,200 years. So the first axial age, 2,500 years ago, when that conjunction was in the sky, we'll have to wait another 1,200 years for the next one. It's an amazing synchronicity. But we do have other conjunctions alignments going on now, particularly the waning Uranus-Pluto square, which began around 2005 and will still be in effect for another year or two, that is coinciding with the great revolutionary movements of the last, and disruptions of the last 15 years. Sorry, yes, and then Daniel? You can read, if you want to read about this, look up Richard Tarnas. You can go online and see some great videos, or if you really want, the book, it's Cosmos and Psyche.
Oh, you've left us pretty much where Doc left us. It doesn't look very hopeful. I just want to know what your personal recommendations are.
Well, I didn't have time to get a slide here, but I'm going to put a plug for Jeremy's and Revelor's new integral imprint that I'm honored that this essay monograph that I recently completed is currently available as a free PDF download, but an enhanced version will come out as a print version, and it's called Living in End Times, Beyond Hope and Despair. So my own, in answer to your question, sometimes I oscillate. I don't have much hope, but sometimes I still have despair. But there are other moments where I'm able to tune into and cultivate a heart-mind space that is neither despair nor hope, through a certain kind of faith. So I still believe and affirm the need for and possibility for faith, but it's not faith in a savior outside of the cosmos. It's a faith in terms of a willingness to affirm unconditionally the intrinsic goodness and value of certain things, the goodness and value of life, of solidarity, of love, of decency, right? That regardless of outcome. And these youth of Extinction Rebellion, many of them are not hopeful, but they're choosing life. They're choosing to rebel for life, for the sake of life, regardless of outcome. Now, from the perspective of the achronon, of the integral aperspectival, in a sense, from my point of view, it doesn't matter whether, of course it matters, but maybe from one perspective, it doesn't matter whether or not our species or our civilization only has 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years. What matters is how we're going to live whatever time we have left, because whatever we do, in a sense, is held as eternally in the embrace of origin and is there always already, right? So this is how I approach it.
I just want to say that somehow your talk just filled me with incredible amounts of hope.
Wow.
I can't explain exactly how, except that it draws everything that has been said so far together into an incredible alchemical mix of hope and despair.
Wow.
And I'm reminded of Glenn's assertion regarding the democracy deriving from the Haudenosaunee, and I think that if we can go back to recognizing that one of their greatest contributions was the horticultural option, the creation of the Amazon was not through nature, it was through human interaction with the Amazon. Right, 1491, there was bison in upstate New York because there had been burns that created prairies that moved from the plains all the way to the East Coast. And bringing all of that together into this nonviolent extinction rebellion movement is, to me, like practically the same thing as saying we can't put our faith in a savior unless we feel the touch of the savior, unless we feel the touch of the Great Mother, who in her darkness is the tension that's surrounding us, is the humanity coursing around in the net and in the consciousness. And yet that in that embrace we can find the same conduit through which that can find another expression.
Thank you.
And I too just really loved your presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's also, it just, probably because you teach Tai Chi also, but it's so embodied. Thank you for, even when you walked away to represent the eons, it's just so wonderful and such a big picture indeed. I did want to ask a little more clarification about the one slide, for lack of a better word, of the socioeconomic theories and the or trends and the
Oops.
Yeah, if you can go back to that for a second. Yeah, the one that jumped out at me that is definitely both, I would say, is dams, large dams. So I just, from a certain perspective, and one that totally resonates with me at every level, the rivers are Mother Earth's ventricles, and the most productive thing we could do economically, ecologically, and in so many other ways would be to undam the dams. If we could free those rivers again, we repair the watersheds that have been damaged and all life forms that radiate from them, and we've done so much damage to the trees that live by the river that cool the river and have the reciprocal relationship with the waters and keep them at the right temperature and keep them healthy for the fish. And I mean, so much has been undone by building dams, and sometimes in this modern era, when we're looking at climate change too narrowly, I would say through the view of just carbon emissions, we forget. We think hydroelectric power, oh, that's fine because it's not increasing carbon emissions, but it is causing such enormous destruction. So I wonder how you can, and I didn't completely understand this graph. If you could speak a little bit more about the graph and how
this is a representation of so-called, it's a more integral movement of Earth system sciences. So Earth system sciences, which sort of came out of Gaia theory, tends to focus merely on the physical, sort of the physiology of Earth. And this is the human physical impact, socioeconomic. It doesn't include the consciousness dimension or worldview or anything, so it's not fully integral in that sense. But it's combining the body of Earth with the human physical impact here. And what's going on here, the body of the Earth, is only because of what's going on here.
Got it.
Right? So, what we're seeing now is, as you're pointing out, is that everything is connected. So not only the human and the non-human, but all of these factors are interconnected. And it's a really wicked problem. So yes, we need to draw carbon down. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. We need to eventually, hopefully, dismantle the dams. We need to completely revolutionize the way we produce food, get rid of industrial agriculture. We need to do everything now. The whole political economy on the planetary scale needs to change now if we're to avoid the worst. Now, if I were a betting man, I would say that there's no chance that that's going to happen, unfortunately. It doesn't mean that we can't still do a lot. We can and we must. Because even if the little that we can do might have enormous consequences in alleviating suffering, for one. But even if it didn't, it's the right thing to do. Okay? And to the extent that we do what's right, we are at the very least saving our souls. Right? We may not be able to save what we want to save. But if we're lucky, we'll at least be able to save our souls. And we'll be able to save some species. We'll be able to diminish the suffering that, that we will need to face anyway. But we need to come together and try to figure out the complex relations between all of these physical systems while we're working on the psycho-spiritual dimension at the same time. Now, we're all, most of us, some of us are trained and working in sciences, but, most of us are working in the area of consciousness, and that's essential. So,
Well, maybe just one more question.
Jeremy.
So, wonderful talk, thank you. Thank you, Sean. On that note, on working on the realm of consciousness, you mentioned initiation is sort of the key thing here that we're going through. But with initiations, very often there comes new myths, new worldviews. So my question that I'm searching for is how, or what are the processes, what are the myths, what are the states of consciousness that we need to be leaning into, submerging into, training in right now? You mentioned a few of them in Coming Home in terms of these planetary myths. So I'm wondering, as a kind of intensifier, where can we lean in to help us do this whole systems approach, this whole systems lead we need right now?
Yeah, great question. Well, all of the resources are there. The world's wisdom traditions, for the first time ever, as they're disappearing, are also available at the click, at the click of a mouse. Teachers, so many traditions that we can draw from. This is an indication of the second axial age. But with all initiations, usually the teachings come, the transmission comes only when the initiate, the initiand, fully confronts death. If they're not willing to completely open themselves up to the prospect of their own mortality, and that can mean letting in the grief, letting in the fear, letting in the despair, but doing it in a supportive context. And we have, like, for instance, Joanna Macy and the work that reconnects that she does and that I do, and there are many others, providing ritual, communal frameworks. The world great religions, the many Christian sects are greening their religion and providing communal support for that to happen. I'm getting a stop sign here. I have to stop. Looking forward to carrying on the conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Set up for me.
Good, yeah, I thought so.
I was going to show that, and I
Were
took
you?
it out. So.
Oh, good. So you can just refer to it now.
Yeah, right.
People will have it in their memory. You want to delete that, or you can?
I'm just going to.
You can keep it if you want. If this is your computer, you can keep those images.
No,
if you
We're
want.
gonna, we'll put everything together and figure out what way we can.
Okay.